I never thought a single decision could change the entire rhythm of my life. I never imagined that one careless exchange, one selfish desire to feel seen again, could unravel the years I had built with the man who once made my heart race. But here I am, sitting on the edge of the same bed we once shared, looking at the ghost of my marriage, wondering when love turned into a quiet war neither of us knew how to end. Ethan was my husband for 10 years. 10 long, beautiful, and exhausting years. He was reliable, calm, and painfully loyal. He worked hard, never missed a mortgage payment, and always fixed the leaking sink before I even had to ask. But somewhere in between work schedules, late dinners, and muted arguments, something began to fade, like an old photograph losing color in the sun. We weren't unhappy, not exactly. We just stopped seeing each other. His eyes always looked past me, and my heart started craving something I couldn't name. That's when Mason entered my life. He was everything Ethan wasn't: spontaneous, bold, a little reckless. Mason was Ethan's best friend. They grew up together, played football in high school, stood by each other at our wedding. He was around so often that he became part of the family. Until the day I looked at him and saw something different, something dangerous. It started with glances that lasted too long, conversations that felt like secrets. The first time his hand brushed mine, I felt something wake up inside me, a spark I hadn't felt in years. I told myself it was harmless, that I just missed being noticed. But hearts are terrible liars, and when Ethan started coming home late, I stopped asking where he was going. It was easier to tell myself we were both drifting. The night everything changed was during a small get-together at our house. Ethan had invited a few friends, and Mason came too, bringing his usual laughter and stories. We drank too much wine, and the air between us grew thick with unspoken things. When Ethan went upstairs to take a call, Mason followed me into the kitchen. "Does he even see you anymore?" Mason asked softly, his voice low, dangerous. I didn't answer. My hands trembled as I washed the dishes, pretending not to notice how close he was. "You deserve to be seen," he whispered. That was the moment everything broke. It wasn't supposed to happen. One kiss, that's all it was, but that kiss turned into nights of guilt and stolen hours in hotel rooms across town. Mason made me feel alive, but every touch came with a shadow of shame. We told ourselves it was love, but deep down, we knew it was escape. From the silence, from the ache of being unseen. Ethan didn't find out right away. He was busy, distracted. Or maybe he saw but chose not to see. Until the day I made the stupidest choice of my life. It was Mason's idea. He joked one night, "What if we just swapped lives? You and I, together, for real. Ethan can have someone who actually wants him, and you can have what you've been missing." I laughed at first, but the idea stuck. At the time, our friends Ava and Lucas were going through their own troubles. Ava was beautiful, sharp, independent, and always envied me for my perfect marriage. Lucas was Ethan's coworker, kind but timid. Somewhere in my wine-soaked logic, I thought swapping, trading, would make sense. Mason and I would be free, Ethan would move on, and everything broken could start again. The swap wasn't literal at first. It started with distance. I pushed Ethan away until he stopped trying. We slept on opposite sides of the bed, spoke only about bills and groceries. Eventually, we separated to think. He stayed with Lucas for a few weeks, and that's when everything twisted further. Ava and I went out for dinner one evening. I told her everything. The affair, the lies, the guilt, all spilling out like poison. She listened, quiet, then said, "Maybe Ethan deserves better than both of us." 2 days later, I found out she'd gone to see him. At first, I was furious. How could she? But then a strange calm settled in me. Maybe this was fate. Maybe it was the swap Mason had joked about, only I hadn't realized how literal it would become. Weeks passed. Ethan stopped calling. Mason moved in with me. It felt like a victory at first. The passion was intoxicating. Laughter, late-night talks, a fire I hadn't felt in years. But soon, the cracks appeared. Mason wasn't the man I thought he was. His charm faded once the secrecy was gone. The thrill died, and what was left was a restless man who loved chaos more than commitment. He stayed out late, came home drunk, sometimes not at all. When he did, he'd stare at me with disappointment, as if I had failed to keep the fantasy alive. We fought, loudly, cruelly. One night, he yelled, "You left a man who loved you for me, and now you're surprised I'm not him?" His words hit harder than any slap. I wanted to scream that I'd done it for love, that I had believed in us. But even as I opened my mouth, I knew it was a lie. I hadn't swapped my husband for love. I had swapped him for attention, for the illusion of being desired again. The months that followed were a slow descent. Ethan and Ava began to appear together at gatherings, quietly, respectfully. He looked lighter, as if the weight of me had finally lifted off his chest. Every time I saw them, a piece of me cracked. Mason started spending weekends away. He said it was work, but I knew better. Karma has a cruel sense of humor, and I was living proof. The same loneliness I had run from was now staring at me in the mirror again, only worse, because this time I had no one to blame but myself. Then came the day that changed everything. It was raining, hard, the kind of storm that makes the world go quiet. Mason had been gone for 2 days. I sat by the window clutching my phone, waiting for a call that didn't come. And then, a knock. When I opened the door, Ethan was standing there. He looked the same, yet different. Calm, older. There was a kindness in his eyes I didn't deserve. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded, unable to speak. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Mason had first kissed me. "I wanted to thank you," Ethan began, "for letting me go." The words burned. "I didn't let you go. I lost you." He smiled sadly. "Maybe both." Silence filled the room, heavy and tender. He looked around, then said quietly, "Ava makes me laugh. I haven't laughed in years. But when I see you, I remember the good times too. I don't hate you, Emily. I can't be that man anymore." I wanted to tell him I was sorry, that I'd trade everything to go back, but the apology felt too small for the ruins between us. "I hope you find peace," he said, standing up. "We both deserve that." He left without another word. I sat there for hours, the rain drowning out everything except the sound of my own regret. That night, Mason came home drunk. He reeked of perfume that wasn't mine. When I asked where he'd been, he just laughed. "You thought swapping him for me would make you happy?" he said, slumping into a chair. Guess we both overestimated ourselves. The next morning, I woke up to silence. Mason was gone, his side of the bed cold, the faint scent of his cologne still lingering in the air like an unwanted memory. I sat there staring at the empty space beside me, the ache inside my chest deeper than I'd ever known. I thought I had already hit rock bottom, but it turned out there were still miles left to fall. I spent the morning walking through the house, our house, touching the things that no longer felt like mine. The walls that once echoed with laughter now seemed to hum with guilt. I found an old photo of Ethan and me on our honeymoon, smiling, sunburned, holding hands. I didn't even remember the last time we'd held hands. My fingers brushed the image, tracing the outline of his face, and for the first time in months, I cried. Not the kind of crying that comes from anger, but the kind that comes from pure, unfiltered loss. By afternoon, I knew I couldn't stay in that house anymore. Mason's clothes were scattered across the living room, a constant reminder of the mistake I had chosen over love. I packed a small bag, left the keys on the counter, and walked out without looking back. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I couldn't stay. I checked into a small motel on the edge of town. The room smelled faintly of bleach and cigarettes, but it was quiet. I sat on the bed and thought about everything. The way Ethan used to bring me coffee in bed, the way he'd squeeze my shoulder when I was anxious, the way he used to say, "We'll figure it out whenever life got hard." I had traded all of that for Mason's fire, and now all I had was ash. Days passed in a blur. I started going for walks just to feel something real again. One evening, I ran into Ava at a grocery store. It was the first time we'd seen each other since Ethan left. For a moment, we just stared. Two women bound by the same man, by the same mistakes. "Emily," she said softly, her voice careful, almost guilty. I nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "I look happy," I said, forcing a smile. She hesitated. "I am, but it's complicated." Her honesty hurt more than her happiness ever could. She continued, "Ethan talks about you sometimes. Not with anger, just sadness. He says he hopes you're okay." My throat tightened. "Tell him I'm not," I whispered, surprising both of us. "But I'm trying to be." Ava reached for my hand, her eyes soft. "I think he knows that." After she left, I sat in my car for almost an hour, staring at nothing. Ethan still thought about me, not with hate. That realization hurt more than if he had despised me, because it meant he still cared in some buried corner of his heart, and I had destroyed that care with my own hands. That night, I got a call from Mason. "Emily," he slurred, "I messed up." I almost hung up, but something in his voice stopped me. "I'm at the bar," he said, his tone shaking. "Please, just come." Against my better judgment, I went. He was sitting alone, head down, eyes red. When he saw me, he looked like a man who had finally realized the weight of his own chaos. He said, "I saw Ethan today. He looked peaceful." You know what he said to me? He said, "Take care of her." Can you believe that? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I don't deserve that man's forgiveness, and neither do you. The words were cruel, but they were true. He looked up at me then, his expression breaking. "You ruined me, didn't you?" I shook my head slowly. "No, Mason, you didn't ruin me. I ruined myself when I stopped loving what was real." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Something had shifted inside me. A quiet realization that the person I had become wasn't who I wanted to be anymore. That night, I left Mason for good. I didn't slam the door, didn't shout or cry. I just walked away. Sometimes endings don't need explosions, just silence. In the weeks that followed, I started rebuilding, one breath at a time. I got a small apartment downtown, started working at the local bookstore. The quiet routine felt strange at first, but healing often hides in the small, uneventful days. Every morning, I'd make myself coffee and sit by the window, watching the world wake up, wondering if Ethan was doing the same somewhere. One afternoon, I was shelving books when I heard a familiar voice. "Emily." I turned around. Ethan was standing there, holding a paperback, looking uncertain. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath. "You look good," he said, finally, his voice soft. "So do you," my hands trembling slightly. He looked around the shop, then back at me. "I didn't know you worked here." I didn't, until recently. I needed a fresh start. He nodded slowly. I know what that feels like. We talked for a few minutes. Small talk about work, the weather, things that didn't matter but somehow did. When he turned to leave, I thought that was it, that we'd go back to being polite strangers. But then he stopped and looked back at me. Emily, he said quietly, do you still write? I blinked. Write? He smiled faintly. You used to write poems about the ocean, remember? You said it was the only place you felt understood. I had almost forgotten. No, I whispered. Not in years. You should, he said simply. You always had a way with words. And then he left, just like that. But his words stayed. That night, I took out an old notebook and began to write. Not about love, not about loss, but about forgiveness. The kind that doesn't come from others, but from yourself. Weeks passed. I didn't see Ethan again, but I started hearing from people that he and Ava had taken a break. Something about needing space. I didn't ask questions. It wasn't my place. But part of me wondered if the past was finally loosening its grip on all of us. Then one morning, I got a letter. Handwritten, neat, familiar. It was from Ethan. Emily, I don't know why I'm writing this, except that I've been thinking about that day in your kitchen. The rain, the silence, the way you said you lost me. I think you were right. We both lost each other somewhere between trying to be perfect and forgetting how to be kind. I've spent months trying to hate you, but I can't. Maybe that's weakness, or maybe it's love in its final form, the kind that no longer needs to hold on. Ava and I are taking some time apart. She's a good woman, but sometimes good isn't enough when your heart still remembers the shape of another home. I hope you're okay. I hope you're writing again. And I hope one day we can sit across from each other and not see ghosts anymore. Just two people who loved, lost, and learned. I read that letter over and over until the ink started to blur with my tears. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a promise. It was something softer. Forgiveness wrapped in honesty. It had been 6 months since Ethan's letter, and I had begun to learn the quiet art of living alone. The world moved differently when there was no one to answer to, no one to hurt, no one to please. I had found a rhythm in solitude. Mornings with coffee and poetry, afternoons spent among the comforting smell of books, evenings wrapped in silence instead of regret. But healing is never a straight path. Some nights I'd wake up with the echo of Ethan's laughter in my mind, or with the memory of Mason's voice whispering promises that never meant anything. There were moments when guilt clawed its way back, whispering that I didn't deserve peace. Still, I forced myself to breathe through it, to remember that pain didn't make me unworthy of redemption. One evening, I attended a small poetry reading at a local cafe. My manager had encouraged me to share something I'd written, but I almost didn't go. My hands shook as I read from my notebook, a piece about loss, forgiveness, and the quiet courage of starting over. When I finished, the audience clapped softly, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was pretending to be okay. I was okay. Fragile, still healing, but real. After the reading, as I was packing my things, I heard a familiar voice behind me. Still writing about the ocean? I turned, and there he was again, Ethan. He looked the same, yet lighter, more grounded. He was wearing that same navy jacket I'd bought him for his birthday years ago. It felt like the universe had waited until I was ready before bringing him back. I guess I never stopped, I said softly. He smiled, stepping closer. I read your poem. It sounded like you were finally breathing again. I'm trying, one line at a time. We sat down at a corner table, and for a while, it was as if no time had passed at all. We talked about everything: the bookstore, his job, how he'd started painting again. He told me Ava had moved to another city. They had parted on good terms, but he admitted it hadn't been love, just comfort. I think we both needed something familiar to hold on to, but comfort isn't the same as peace. I nodded. No, it's not. There was a long silence, the kind that used to suffocate us, but now felt almost gentle. He said finally, his voice steady but soft, "Emily, do you ever think about us?" I looked at him, really looked at him. The faint lines near his eyes, the calmness that hadn't existed before. "Every day," I admitted. Not with hope or pain, just reflection. You were my home once, and I burned it down. He shook his head. "We both set the fire. You just lit the first match." I let out a breath that was half a laugh, half a sob. I used to think I was the only one to blame. I blamed you for a long time, until I realized I wasn't innocent either. I stopped seeing you long before you stopped trying to be seen. Those words undid something inside me. All those nights I'd cursed myself, all those mornings I'd wondered if I was the monster, suddenly I saw it for what it was: two broken people who didn't know how to love each other anymore, and both too afraid to say it. He reached across the table and took my hand. The touch was familiar and strange all at once. He said, "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to see you again and know that you're okay." "I'm getting there," I whispered. "Are you?" "I think so. Maybe we're both just learning how to start over." That night, I walked home with a strange lightness in my chest. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something like peace, a quiet acknowledgement that the past didn't have to define the rest of my life. Weeks passed, and Ethan began visiting the bookstore occasionally. Sometimes he'd bring coffee, sometimes he'd just browse and leave without a word. Slowly, we began to rebuild something. Not what we had before, but something new, gentler, more honest. One Saturday morning, he showed up with 2 cups of coffee and a small canvas tucked under his arm. "I painted something," he said. "Thought you might want to see it." He handed it to me, and when I unwrapped it, my breath caught. It was a painting of the ocean, vast, calm, endless. In the middle of it, 2 small figures stood on the shore, far apart but facing the same horizon. "It's us," he said. "Not together, not apart, just looking in the same direction." I traced the brushstrokes with my fingers. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "You've gotten better." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I just learned to see things more clearly." Something inside me softened. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to apologize or explain. I simply smiled back. "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" I asked before I could second-guess myself. His eyebrows lifted slightly, a hint of surprise and warmth mixing in his eyes. "Yeah," he said. "I'd like that." Dinner turned into long walks. Long walks turned into quiet weekends together. We didn't rush. We didn't call it love, not yet. We called it forgiveness, and that felt truer. There were still scars, words that couldn't be unsaid, nights that couldn't be undone. But there was also laughter again, small and cautious, like a flame rekindling after the storm. One evening, months later, as we sat on a park bench watching the sunset, Ethan turned to me and said, "Do you ever wish we could go back?" I thought about it. The younger versions of us, the promises we couldn't keep, the mistakes that had shaped us. "No," I said finally. If we went back, we'd just make the same mistakes again. I don't want to rewrite the past. I just want to understand it. He nodded slowly, a small smile on his lips. I think that's the first truly honest thing either of us has ever said. We both laughed quietly, and for the first time, it didn't hurt to remember. The air between us was lighter, freer, like two souls who had finally stopped trying to own each other and simply learned to exist side by side. That night, when he dropped me off at my apartment, he didn't kiss me. He just said, "Good night, Emily," the way he used to. And something in my heart fluttered, not from longing, but from gratitude. Inside, I stood by the window, looking at the city lights. I realized that love doesn't always come back in the same form. Sometimes it returns as understanding, as quiet companionship, as forgiveness shared between two broken hearts that refused to stay bitter. A year had passed since the night Ethan and I sat under that quiet sunset. Life had taken on a steady rhythm, soft, gentle, almost ordinary. I worked at the bookstore full-time, taught a small writing class at the community center, and spent weekends visiting the coast. The ocean had become my confession room, the place where I could finally let the waves take what I could no longer carry. Ethan and I stayed close. Not lovers, not strangers, something in between. We shared dinners, laughed easily, and sometimes sat in silence without needing to fill it. It wasn't a fairy tale reunion. It was better. Real, fragile, earned. But life, as I'd learned, always has one more test waiting. It was a gray, windy afternoon when Mason showed up again. I hadn't seen him in almost a year. I was closing the bookstore when I looked up and saw him standing outside, hands in his pockets, his eyes tired. For a moment, I didn't recognize him. He looked older, thinner, like life had been grinding him down the way guilt had once ground me. "Emily," he said softly when I opened the door. I didn't move. The sound of his voice stirred ghosts I thought I'd buried. "What are you doing here?" He hesitated. "I needed to see you. Just once." Something in his voice made me step aside. He walked in slowly, glancing around at the shelves like he was afraid to touch anything. The quiet hum of the shop felt heavier now, full of unspoken memories. "You look good," he said, forcing a small smile. "So do you," I replied, though we both knew it wasn't true. He laughed quietly. "You don't have to lie. I've seen better days." We stood in silence for a while before he spoke again. "I heard about you and Ethan. You two back together?" "Not in the way you think," I said. "We're just at peace." He nodded slowly. "Peace," he repeated, as if testing the word on his tongue. "I don't think I've felt that in a long time." "What happened to you, Mason?" I asked quietly. He looked down at his hands. "I kept running," he said simply. "After you left, I tried to fill the silence with new faces, new cities, but it all felt the same, empty. I thought I could outdrink my guilt, but it doesn't work like that." He glanced up at me, eyes wet. "I loved you, you know? Maybe not the way you needed, but I did." My throat tightened. "And I thought I loved you, but I think we were just two broken people clinging to the wrong thing." He nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. "I've replayed that night 1,000 times, the night we crossed the line. If I could take it back, I would." "I would too," I said softly. He smiled faintly. "You found your way out. That's good. You always had more strength than me." "It wasn't strength. It was survival." Mason looked around the bookstore again, then back at me. "You deserve this peace, Emily. Don't let me bring the past back." "You're not," I said gently. "Maybe this is the closure we both needed." He nodded slowly. "Maybe." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "Mason." He stopped at the door. "I forgive you," I said, "not because you deserve it, because I need to." He looked at me for a long moment, eyes soft with something like relief. "Then maybe there's hope for both of us after all." And then he was gone. I stood there for a long time after he left, listening to the faint sound of the bell above the door swinging in the wind. It didn't feel like reopening a wound. It felt like finally closing one. That night I went to the ocean. The waves were calm, the sky painted with fading gold. I sat on the sand, knees pulled to my chest, and watched the tide breathe in and out. I thought about Ethan, his quiet strength, his kindness that never demanded forgiveness but offered it freely. I thought about Mason, his fire, his ruin, the lessons that burned but taught me who I was. And I thought about myself, the woman who had traded love for attention, and somehow found her way back through pain, humility, and time. Ethan met me there later, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed.
"Rough day?" he asked quietly.
I nodded. Mason came by. He didn't flinch. I figured he might, eventually. We said goodbye. I said, really goodbye this time. He looked at me, then at the sea. "I'm glad." Silence settled between us, but it wasn't heavy. It was calm, the kind of silence that speaks more than words ever could. After a while, I said softly, "Do you ever think we were meant to end up like this? Not together, not apart, just here?" He smiled. "I think we were meant to grow. Maybe this is what that looks like." I looked at him, at the man I had once loved and hurt, the man who had forgiven me anyway, the man who had once been my husband and now was something deeper, a reminder that love can exist even after everything else breaks. "Thank you," I whispered. "For what?" he asked. "For seeing me again." He smiled faintly. "You were never invisible, Emily. You just stopped looking at yourself." The tide creeped closer, cool water brushing against our feet. I leaned my head on his shoulder, not out of longing, but out of quiet understanding. We sat there until the stars came out, until the night folded itself around us like forgiveness. When we finally stood, Ethan turned to me and said, "Take care of yourself." "I will," I said. "You too." He hesitated, then smiled. "I think I finally know how." We walked back along the beach, side by side, not holding hands, not needing to. The ocean roared softly behind us, not as a reminder of what we lost, but of everything we survived. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something that brought tears to my eyes, not from sadness, but from peace. I hadn't just swapped my husband. I had swapped my entire self. The woman who lived in fear and need for the woman who finally understood that love without self-worth is just dependency wearing a prettier mask. And maybe, just maybe, the real love story wasn't about losing Ethan or Mason, it was about finding Emily again. The next morning, I wrote a single line in my notebook, the ending to the story I'd been living all this time. I swapped my husband to find love, but what I found instead was myself, and that was the only person who could ever set me free. And for the first time, that was enough.